Hi, and welcome to another video special episode of our VHS recording of the Blue Screen Brothers. My name is Alex, and with me we have the entire Blue Screen Brothers ensemble with me. We have Marius and Paul-Erik and Olav.
Hello.
Hi, guys.
Hello.
So what are we going to talk about today, Olav? I've heard something about authentication stuff and apps.
Yeah, because no matter how long it's been, you will always have a problem with defining the difference between enterprise apps and app registration. And it's not only me; everybody I talk to are unsure what is an app registration, what is an enterprise app, how are they working together. And in my mind, I have created the rule that the app registration is the config nearest to the application itself, and the enterprise application are a sort of endpoint into the app registration. But that's just to try to make it simpler, and I'm pretty sure that Marius will tell me that I'm wrong.
Yeah, so there's a lot of misnomers and misunderstandings when it comes to all of this, and it is actually not that difficult, but it is.
Yeah.
So let's just play around in the Azure portal a little bit first, and I can sort of explain a bit, and then we'll play around a bit with PowerShell and do some things there. Then I think we can do some Azure stuff. This is sort of improvised, so we're just gonna go with the flow. So this is a brand new demo tenant from Microsoft. So this has some users and some different kinds of things. And if we go to enterprise applications first, we can see there are some applications. I have no idea what any of this is. So you have some like demo platform and whatnot. Let's start from scratch.
You know some of them.
Yes, I know some of them. So actually, we can first, if we go to enterprise application and just remove this filter here, we can see there's 196 applications in my Azure AD by default.
These are all defined by Microsoft for you, right? So
yes, in this case, yes, they are. Yeah. And of course, this one is called Yggdrasil. I don't know what that is, other than some kind of reference to old Norse. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But I guess this setup is a demo tenant, so it have some
yes, but you will find this in your normal tenant as well.
Yeah.
So, for example, in your workplace, and if you go into enterprise applications, you will see a bunch of them. And some of them have different permissions, and all used by Microsoft essentially. I'll show you that. But let's start with an app registration.
That was what I'm thinking as the front end into the application that Microsoft have published.
Exactly.
So that's why I think about the enterprise application as a front end to something, because it's not the end goal, it's the way to something.
So I would say front end is probably not necessarily a good word, but instance might be a better word. That's what I usually use. So then if we go to app registrations in this same tenant, all applications, I have 6. So that means that the 196 enterprise applications, I only have 6 app registrations. What that means is essentially that these, or 190 of my enterprise applications, stem from somewhere else. So their app registration is somewhere else in another tenant, usually Microsoft's.
Yes. So you will actually never find an enterprise application without an app registration, but it's not sure the app registration is in your tenant.
Correct. So often, so you have many types of enterprise applications. You have something called a managed service identity, which service principal is also like used for essentially the same thing as an enterprise application. I'm going to use those sort of interchangeably. But that essentially means that these enterprise applications that we see here, so let's say Microsoft Graph PowerShell, will have an application ID and be registered in the Microsoft tenant. So the app registration for this app ID is in the Microsoft tenant. But we can create our own. So let's do that first. I go to app registrations and I click new registration. So let's call it demo. We're not going to call it demo 1 because I think there's already something called demo something. So we're going to mix it up.
Be more creative, Marius. Come on.
Olav
something
yeah,
cool.
yeah, call it test.
No.
Demo test.
So this is Olav 1. And here I can choose what account types my application supports. So first of all, by default, it's single tenant. That means that this app registration is only to be used in my tenant. While I can also choose this multi-tenant version, where essentially other tenants can also use my app registration. And that can be very useful in situations where I want to provide, let's say, a web portal for many, many, many organizations. Then I would use a multi-tenant app registration, and they would consent to my app registration in their own tenant and be able to sign in. You can actually sign into a single tenant application with an external user as well, but that will be through B2B. So then you will need to be invited into our tenant in order to authenticate to this.
Yes. So if you have a guest account, you could have logged on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's correct. And then you have a few other options, which involves essentially your good old hotmail.com account. So your Microsoft account, essentially. Or you can have Gmail or whatever, but it's your personal Microsoft account. So you can also choose those options. Let's start with a single tenant app. Then you can provide a redirect URI. So this is used depending on the type of application you are implementing. So in our first scenario here, we can say nothing, because we will only use it through PowerShell, for example. So we won't use it as a redirect or a web redirect. But this could be things like I have a single page application. Then I would say, let's say jot.ms, for example. That's also a single.
Your own certificate for that, or is it?
No.
Can you use? Yeah, you don't need it. You don't need to have a third-party certificate.
No, nothing. So, but this will not allow you to send to HTTP. So you need to use HTTPS, but it could be whatever, or localhost, which is not usually what you do. But yeah, you can define your application essentially, where sometimes it's a native app on a mobile phone. Then this would not have a URL form. It will have like this URN : something something, rather than HTTPS : //. But let's leave it blank for now and click register. So this now actually does two things. So first of all, it creates an app registration, obviously, because we clicked new app registration. But second of all, it also created a service principal or enterprise app based on this app registration in my own tenant. App registration first. So you will see this has now gotten an application ID, which is this one. This is used for essentially every operation that you use or in order to define that this is the app I'm referring to. This is the one you usually use. The object ID here, you can almost ignore. And I say almost. There are a few scenarios, but the object ID of the app registration is not really all that common to care about because you never use it. And then the tenant ID, which is our tenant ID, where we have created app registration. And you can see supported account types and things like that. And this can all be, so this, for example, the supported account type, my organization only. Of course, this is Microsoft, so they called it something else, like single tenant and things like that in the previous page. Now they changed the wording, so now it's my organization only.
Can you change that after you have created it, or is it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So by going to authentication, you can see that I can switch to multi-tenant.
Yeah. But you cannot create an MS Microsoft account only, or the open one. So you can change those two.
Yeah, you can actually do it by modifying the manifest, but let's say no.
Yeah. It's easy to recreate it anyway. So
yeah. So let's go through a bit of the things that we do here. So here we can define things like URLs that is relevant to the application, like the homepage URL, the different the domain that publishes this application. So right now this is a demo tenant without any custom domain, but you can add things like which MPN, so Microsoft Partner ID, is publishing it, and this is essentially in order for the consent part to be more reliable and more understandable for the administrators that are consenting to different kinds of permissions, because essentially I can create an app. We can actually, let's create a little virus sort of now based on an app registration. Because what I can do on authentication, if I click multi-tenant and click save, so this changes nothing right now, but now anyone can consent to this. And I can essentially say, okay, so I want some permissions for the API. This is what my app registration essentially requests access to. So by default, you can see this requests access to user.read. What does that mean? Well, sign in and read user profile. So this is a delegated permission. And what that essentially means is that the app in itself doesn't have any permissions. You will need a user to sign into the app, and then the application will get a token that has the user permission, essentially. So if I now go here and add some permissions, so you can see that I can add different kinds of APIs. There's many like speech APIs and Azure Quantum and Key Vault and things like that. Today we're just going to mention Microsoft Graph. So let's select that one, which is the largest button. And here you can choose.
That's the only reason why we used it, because it's large enough so Polari can see it.
Yes. So here you have delegated an application. So delegated means that this is application that is done on behalf of the user. Permits. Did I say what did I say now? This is permissions that the app gets on behalf of the user. So when we click here, we can choose first of all a few like different so-called open ID permissions. These are very basic, and usually you can allow your users to consent to this by themselves because it's not really that dangerous. So for example, OpenID is a very common one. Sign users in. So this just allows sign in. Not really that scary. But actually, let's say I take, let's search for privy or privileged access and take read write, privileged access read write Azure AD. Read and write privileged access to Azure AD. Sounds scary, right?
That sounds scary.
Yes. And it sort of is, but and you can see admin consent required. That means that an administrator must actually approve that this application can request this permission. So when I do this, I add it, then you can see not granted for Contoso, because this is now, I've added to the application, essentially information saying that this application will now request access to this when you try to consent to it. And I can actually click grant consent. And what did I do now? Well, essentially, I have approved that this application can request this access. But in order for the application to actually get those accesses, a user must sign in that also has access to this. So if I invite you, Olav, into my organization, or I take some other unprivileged user and sign in, they don't have this access. This only allows the application to get the access if the user actually has that access. So if I have global admin and I sign into the application, then a token will be issued that first of all contains the scope, but it allows the application to, on behalf of me, send requests to assign other global admins or create a new global admin and things like that.
Yeah, so this is one of the reasons why we are using privileged identity management, because you don't want to make this mistake if somebody have already created this kind of applications. And since I have not elevated my global admin role, I don't have the global admin role, so it will not work. But if I had elevated it, you could now actually start to create yourself as a global admin.
Exactly. So so in general, you can say that the delegated type is not really dangerous on the face of it. So, for example, I cannot say that, oh, but I have the application ID and I have added a secret. Let's come back to secrets. So now I have this access. No, you don't have any access at all. You need a user account that has this access in order to use it. But you shouldn't just say, oh, let's just add every delegated permission in, because you would like the application to not be able to request to add a global admin, for example, because it doesn't make sense. The application doesn't do it. So let's revoke that like this. Now you can see that this is not granted, but it's still on the configured permissions page, which essentially just means that the app registration is still configured to want to have this permission. And we can actually also go to the manifest now and see that we have something called required resource access. So this manifest is essentially the definition. So everything you see here ends up in the manifest. So if you, let's say you want to take backup of an app registration, take backup of the manifest, and then you're essentially done. So here you can see sign-in audience is Azure AD multiple orgs. That's the same as multi-tenant. And you see the required resource access is what the app requires in order to function. And that's these two. Of course, these two IDs, you have no clue what is, but just Google them and you'll figure out that it's these. And there are ways to look them up. So if I now go, because this is now a multiple organizations account type. If we take this application ID and we jump over to some other kind of tenant, I have all kinds of things available. Let's see if I can find the Azure AD admin consent URL, because I never remember it. I think it's here. Blah, 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 blah. Here we go. So here you will find a URL that you can trigger just to do an a specific admin consent, but there are other ways to trigger it during sign-in and things like that. But let's do this now. So let's paste this up here and just copy everything except the client ID, like this, and take my tenant. So now I'm in another tenant, hold something like this, a dev tenant, and we do like this. Okay, so what I do here now, I have a so-called admin consent URL. I replaced the domain with the domain of my development tenant. I say that I'm going to do an admin consent for this app, which is in our demo tenant. So let's do it. So I can sign in. And this is where you should sort of start getting some. This is dangerous. Because first of all, you can see that Olav N, okay, so it's unverified.
What?
So
are you really Olav? Yes.
Yeah.
Are you unverified?
So this was everything that had to do with this MPN and the domain, that this verified publishers thing.
Yeah, so there was some information that it was going to be a requirement.
Yeah, that was supposed to happen like over a year ago, and I have no idea what is happening to that. So there's still no requirement for that.
Okay.
So yeah, this app may be risky. Only continue if you trust this app. And then this app would like to read and write privileged access to Azure AD.
There's something about the name of the application that makes me instantly distrust it.
Yes.
What?
So this is obviously cancel.
Yeah.
Not even I would have trusted that one.
Exactly.
We know that people click URLs and emails, and we train them to not accept everything. But this seems so legit because it's a login.microsoftonline.com. It has everything looks so legit. What should we train our end users for here?
Well, so usually here you would not really need to train your end users because you will not allow any user just to accept this. Yeah. You will simply deny it by policy, saying that no. So this app requires too much permissions. This needs to be approved by the admin.
If you have an old setup, you actually have the setting up that all users are allowed to approve applications themselves.
Yes, but not, for example, this one, because this requires admin consent all the time. Yeah. So, but that is true. So, and so this is called consent phishing. And what is scary is that by default in Azure AD, up until Azure AD is created for like a year ago or something like that, any user could essentially assign or they could consent that an application can access their email and OneDrive on behalf of them. Yeah. No problem. And combined with so-called offline access. And that means that the app is actually granted permanent permission into their OneDrive and email just by accepting. Dunk, you're done, and you're owned. Yeah. So let's accept this because we trust Olav. So this happens all the time for the admin consent, no reply address, but that's fine. We have successfully done what we needed. So now we're still in our dev environment, and I can go to enterprise applications because Olav, you're obviously enterprise.
Yeah, of course.
Olav 1. And now we can find our application. So now we're in another tenant than before, but we still see this Olav 1. And you can see the app ID is the same. We can jump back just to double verify. You can see here 11FB. So the app is, our application ID is the same. But now we have an enterprise app in our tenant. We can assign users and everything. And this is now actually a service principal in this tenant. And what does that actually mean? So a user is also a principal, right? It's just a user principal, while an enterprise app is essentially a service principal. And that simply means that it can sign into the tenant and it can be assigned permissions. So if I now really screw up and assign this enterprise app global admin, which is perfectly possible to do, then I can actually access this tenant using only information from this other tenant. So so jumping back to our original demo tenant here, trying to sort of keep it a bit clean. We will see under enterprise applications that this also has Olav 1. This is actually not necessary in our tenant. Like in a service provider scenario, you would not really like this Olav 1 app registration to be here at all. You don't need it. So if we do this same thing that we did in the GUI in the Microsoft Graph, you will actually see how this really works. So first of all, we need to sign in. I have installed the Microsoft Graph PowerShell module. So we can sign in. I'm already signed in actually. And I can do get MG application like this. So here are all our apps, including Olav 1. I can also do get MG service principal, all pipe measure or something. Then we will see 197. We had 196, and we created Olav 1. Let's create Olav 2. Olav 2.
Yay! More minions.
Yes. New MG application. And I don't remember the things I need to provide, so let's try. I have a display name, Olav 2. Let's see if there's anything more it wants.
I'm most surprised that we found something that Marius don't remember. Finally.
So now we will see that I created an Olav 2 app registration. And if I now click just get MG application again, you'll see that Olav 2 appeared here. However, let's go to the GUI. And then let's find our first, let's take this Olav 1 first. You will see that this is like managed application in, what does it say? In local directory.
Yeah.
This has a link to Olav 1, which points to the enterprise application. However, if we now find Olav 2, we will see that this says create service principal.
Oh, so yeah, okay.
Yeah, so now we have created this app registration. However, if we go to enterprise application and just search for Olav, you will only see Olav 1. So the portal hides the fact from you that app registration and the service principal or enterprise app is sort of two different things, or at least they are created in a fashion where you can actually create only the app registration without the enterprise app. So I can still now go into Olav 2, say permissions, add some stuff. You can see this hasn't added anything by default because we did it through PowerShell. I can do the same thing. I can say OpenID and just click add. I'm not granting anything. I'm just defining that this wants to use this OpenID delegated permission. If we now copy this, this is now changed to supported account types, all Microsoft account users. It's not really what we wanted, was it? And if we go to the manifest and update this. I could have done this a bit easier. Azure AD multiple orgs, was that the name? I don't remember.
So this is most likely one of the parameters you can have added to the PowerShell command, and it will be.
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And now you can see that under authentication, this has changed to multi-tenant.
Yeah.
So it is possible to change, but you must do it through the manifest and know the values you need to input.
Yeah.
And apparently
if you don't remember them, just call Marius. His number is +47.
So now we have a multi-tenant app instead. Let's copy the client ID and go to this dev tenant. Run the same admin consent URL, just with a new application ID.
Yeah.
And go. And you can see now it's only sign in and read user profile. Except we'll get to the same no reply address thing. That's fine. So now if we go to enterprise applications in that tenant, search for Olav, you will find Olav 1 and Olav 2. So
you're
essentially,
lucky you have 2 Olavs in enterprise apps.
Yeah. So now we actually have an enterprise app in our remote tenant, but the app registration is in the other, and we don't have an enterprise app in our original tenant.
Yeah.
So and that's more common in a service provider scenario. So you can do this with Terraform or other means of creating things, but this is very simple, at least, to do with a graph.
Yeah.
So now,
would it be possible now to delete Olav 1 enterprise apps and it would still work, or would you have killed something?
That's perfectly possible. You can say remove MG service principal, and the app registration will still be there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you don't break it that way, but the other way around, it will of course be broken.
Yeah. But what will break is that if you have granted permissions, and that was what I figured we could try to do now.
Yeah.
Cool. So let's go to our Olav 1 app. So we have this app ID. So right now, this service principal has this app has no access to our tenant. It exists as an enterprise application, but it doesn't really have any permissions. And we can test that. So for this Olav 1 app registration, we can manage certificates and secrets. So essentially credentials. And the way you authenticate as an app is by one of 3 methods. So essentially, it's either certificate, where you upload a public key and you need to exchange a JWT and things. It's a bit complex. I have some blog posts on it if you want to do it. You can have secrets. So we can add here, just say Alex super secret. Let's have it valid for 6 months, add, and we will have a secret. So this is our secret, which will be visible only right now, and then it will be gone. We cannot get it back, so we're going to use that.
We've done that mistake before.
Yes, everyone has.
Why isn't that alerted better in that console and say, please copy paste the value? It's never going to be shown again in a better sense.
It showed when you created it. I
yes.
think when you created a secret, it showed.
Do we really read messages on screen?
Are you going to tell people that?
No, it doesn't really say it all that well, actually.
No, there's a reason we've done this mistake.
Yeah, and there's the last option, federated credential, which allows you to federate it to an OpenID Connect provider. A use case is, for example, when running GitHub actions. So authenticating from GitHub actions agents directly into the app registration without needing to handle secrets. I have a few blog posts on those as well. So now we have added these client secrets, and I have just the simplest PowerShell ever, just setting a variable here called secret, but we're going to need some more information. So let's copy our application ID. Client ID equals something. And of course, I never call it an application ID. I always call it a client ID. And here they even have both application and client in parentheses. So it's important to have many names for the same exact thing.
Yeah. And change it up on the different tools. Yeah.
Like this. So now we have a client secret, a client ID, and a tenant ID. And this is actually enough to try to sign into a tenant. So we can do that now. Of course, I haven't prepared anything, so I just need to fix it.
Yeah.
But we're going to do that. So let's find our first. I usually search this awesome blog here. Client credential grants. I think we have, this is the certificate-based one. This is the identity federation one. And I think I don't usually do the simple things like just using a secret.
Yeah.
So let's take PowerShell, example, Azure AD, client credentials, or something. Let's take the first we can find. Blah, 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 blah. And here we can find what needs to, so here, this is the same thing that has to do with admin consent and all of those things. And I get a token. Here's an example. So what you need to do is the following. So here is an example with like the raw data, and that is perfectly fine. Let's just copy everything and then just convert it to PowerShell, essentially. What is it that we're reading here? Well, so this is the host that we're connecting to, loginmicrosoftonline.com. Every authentication to Azure AD happens there. We need to build, essentially build a URL. This is the path. So this is called the token endpoint. And you can see tenant is supposed to go in here. So that can be either the tenant ID or a domain to that tenant. So now we have the URL. We can provide this as a content type. That's fine. So let's just have it as a content type equals something as a variable. I'm just extracting everything from the example. And then we get some, here is the payload that we're sending. And PowerShell is, of course, awesome. So we should be able to do something like this. We can simply define it as a map. We can define a scope, and you will find this a bit interesting. It looks, of course, this has now been URL encoded, but it looks like this. So the scope is blah, 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 graphmicrosoft.com/.default. And this simply says that I want all the permissions assigned to the application. But you can define when you get a specific token that you only want user read all or whatever. But this will say, give me everything. We have this client secret, which is our secret from up here. And we have this grant type equals client credentials. So grant type defines how we or essentially what type of authentication is it that we're doing. Now we're doing a client credentials grant, which means that we use, well, only a client, which is an app registration. So, but it needs to have a service principal in your tenant. Now we have everything essentially. Let's run this towards URL with the content type, and body. I think this should be enough. and I think we need to post it. Let's see if it works on the first try. Of course, it doesn't do that. Cannot blah 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 because I call it URL like this. So it worked on the first or second try. Just to go through what we did, we're sending a body to a URL with our client ID and secret, essentially. So, of course, we're sending the secret, which is why this is not the most secure way of doing it. Using a certificate is way more secure, but this works just fine. And we're getting an access token. You can see here, access token. And now we can do all kinds of things with this access token by looking at it. So let's just copy it and go to jot.ms to analyze it. So this is what we received from Azure AD. So you can see that the audience is the Microsoft Graph. So I have now requested a token to the Microsoft to access the Microsoft Graph. This token is valid for Olav 1. Or Olav 1, I mean. This is the app ID, 11FB. This is Norwegian-English combination. And yeah, so this is my app ID, and that essentially means that this token is for our app, essentially. And here we will actually see that this subject here is the object ID of the app registration and things, but no, it's not. This is the object ID of our enterprise app, and I'll get back to that. So we can now try to use this access token to get something from the Microsoft Graph. We can then do invoke REST method. Let's just say, hello, Microsoft Graph. Let me get your users, please. The only thing I need is essentially to have a header called authorization. Now this suddenly became a PowerShell course instead, but that's fine. Like this. So I'm sending it as an authorization header, and I'm getting insufficient privileges to complete the operation. And that was perfectly expected. So what I did here is that I authenticated as I used the secret and client ID to authenticate to this tenant here, and I got a token back. And then I'm trying to use that token. However, I was unable to get any users.
And that was because it was a delegated token?
That is absolutely part of the reason. So the token is not delegated, but I requested the application permissions because I didn't sign in as a user. I sign in as only the application. And the application has no permissions. So if I now take the Olav 1 app registration and add, let's see, let's take user read all, for example, like this, add permission, then you will see this application and you need, again, to grant it. Yes, let's grant. Now I granted back the privileged access thing, but let's ignore that for now. And then I get a new access token. I need to do it again because my old access token didn't contain the permissions. Now I can actually find my users. So let's just do like this: v.value select display name. So you can see that it was now able to use the permissions. So that means that only by doing this granting here, you're actually granting something a permission, and that's something that you're granting. And this is what I think many people misunderstand, because when you click grant here, you don't do anything with app registration. What you actually do is to assign your enterprise application some permission. And this is like, I think it's sort of historical reasons for things in Azure AD, because if you go to the enterprise app of the think it's called, you know, the Microsoft Graph here. You will see this as a strange app ID. This doesn't really seem to be randomly generated. And on this, you will actually find Olav 1, which is a service principal and it's granted a role that you cannot see here. And this is like the technical part of it. So you cannot really edit it directly in the GUI, but there's like a graph aggregator service where you're granted app role assignments, and that is actually what happens behind the scenes. So the whole, and I think that's what's really difficult for many people to understand, is that when you do a grant here, you don't do anything with the app registration at all. So we have another tenant, right? We have this dev tenant that I showed you. Our app has been granted access to that, but that was before I added user read all. So now I'm in the demo tenant. I have added user read all to the app registration. If we now skip over to the other tenant where Olav 1 also exists, let's copy the domain of it in this situation. Let's just do something like this. Tenant. This isn't really a tenant ID, but that doesn't matter. You can take a domain instead. And then we try to do the same thing. I got users for some unknown reason, which is not what I expected. So what did I do? Yeah, of course. Yeah, I know.
We need to continue our PowerShell for lunch course, because you never taught me this.
Yeah, then we need to do that.
Hmm.
So yeah, the users came, but that's, ignore that. That was just because I run everything and it failed earlier. So this is the last thing we're going to do in this session, I think, and we're going to continue in another session, not to have like a 4-hour video. But here we now have, we are trying to get an access token for this dev tenant instead.
Mm.
And what will then happen is essentially that the app token, or this will not have the permissions required. So if we just don't do this, then it will list correctly. So you will see insufficient privileges. And the reason is that the grant has not happened in the dev tenant. So if I now go back to the dev tenant, I run the same admin consent with this application ID, Olav 1's application ID. And I do the same thing as before. Now you can see this has read all users' full profiles. So now it has actually expanded what it requests of permissions, and I can accept.
So even though you have added
on the service
necessary
provider side, I have added the required permissions.
So it will not be automatically updated until a user go into the page and try to access it.
Exactly. Yeah. So now that I have consented, let's try to do the same thing. And then you will see that this has some different kinds of users.
Yeah. Honeypot.
So now I got honeypot user. And so essentially, now I used an app registration in one tenant to gain access to another tenant. And this is what is used to do consent phishing, essentially, where you can try to, get some permissions in other tenants and just use them to get some data, get some user information and things like that. But it's also very powerful and very useful, because you can manage users at 50 organizations using a single app ID and app secret, which is very useful in a service provider way of doing things. So
I have an important question, actually. If you go back to the app registration site, and you just push add permissions, add a permission.
Mm-hmm.
I think we need to clarify, if you go into a graph, for instance, clarify delegated permission and application permission? When are you using what? Because for me, it's look like never use applications permission, because then you grant more permission without the user's constraint.
So
but
application permissions is usually used when something needs to run in a, let's call it a headless fashion, meaning that you get this. So for example, I can now take this script here and store it in a scheduled task. And I have the secret and a client ID, and I'm running it as the application. Perhaps I want to create a service that backs up my users, right? So I would simply take these and dump them to a file. That's my whole service. That's headless, right? You don't need a user account to do it. You don't want to have a user account because you want something simple. And
because no, you don't have to log on with a username and password. You just use the secret.
Correct.
Or the certificate that should be preferable used. Yeah.
So usually, if you find yourself implementing some kind of third-party application and you need to add application permissions, usually that is weird, because that should often only require delegated permissions. But sometimes, let's say you have an app, a calendar app, an external calendar app, that or some kind of booking application or something that wants to look up users in your directory. Then that might require application permissions, because let's say you have the external service that you have bought needs to have a synchronization of users or something. So every night it goes in and syncs users. So of course Azure AD have features for that, but ignore that. So then it might need delegated permission as user read and OpenID and things like that to sign users into its web part of the service. But it might also require user.read.all application permission for that service to be able to every night go into your tenant and read your users. So there's definitely use cases for using application permissions.
Because in the old days, we would have created a user account that was named as a service account and given permission, and suddenly have a lot of running permission out there.
Yeah, and then the password expires because you forgot to do things, and of course you can put the secret to expire as well, so you still will have problems with that. But you can grant those kinds of application permissions to external services as well with perfect use cases. So but it's more often for your scripts and automations and things like that.
I just have one final question for today, at least. I will have a lot more, but you have now added enterprise application in another tenant. Is it possible for me as the owner of Contoso to see where is my app registration being used?
That's a very good question. Answer: no.
Yeah. We love easy answers, right?
Yeah. No. So actually, that's something I have wanted a few times, especially let's say you are a service provider and you want to have, during the onboarding experience or something, you would like to be able to sort of look up what are my customers without needing a separate service to store it and things. But no, you cannot actually do that. And I think the main reason is probably to avoid some kind of app registration secret to be leaked, and someone just to be able to give me all the tenants that are using this app registration, and okay, so it's this and this and this and this tenant, and then you can simply traverse through that list, right? So it might be that's the reason why there's no such endpoint.
So I guess the only way to see if it's actually being used is trying to monitor if somebody are logging on to it for a period of time.
Well,
see if it's
yes, but that log is also in the tenant that uses your app registration.
Oh,
right?
so you will still not see. Okay.
No, so
No.
that was actually also a very good observation here. So because I have now created Olav 1, I have no clue whatsoever whether this is used in some other tenant. Yeah, I'm
So
sorry.
you have to kill it and see if somebody start to complain.
Yes.
Yeah. Nice.
That's how you do stuff at your work, Olav. You just
Yeah.
switch thing off and then
Yes.
listen for the screams.
I really miss stop or disable button and a lot of more features in Azure. So it's actually possible to see if this is actually necessary. So
Yeah, you have a few. Let's say on the app registration part, I don't think you really have all that many methods.
for that's
of doing
that's
something like
also
that.
an enterprise app settings that you can not make it available for sign-ins,
That is
right?
correct.
So yeah.
That is correct.
Yeah.
No, so it's sort of when I explain it to people, I sort of start to understand why people think this is difficult, because it is difficult.
Yeah.
But that brings us over to something important. Is there anywhere you can do this as a demo, a lab? Is there any learning tutorials from Microsoft? Something that people should dig into, either for trying it out or understand it better?
Yeah, those are the kind of questions that I should prepare an answer for, right?
Yeah.
I have no idea. I just point people to way too complex documentation, and also this video.
Yeah, they should see this video.
This is the video people should start with. That was the simple answer.
And I think one of the funniest thing is that every now and then I sit down and learn this and know what it is and how it works, and then it goes a month and you don't think about it, and then you start to be unsecure again. What was the reason for and what? And that's why I'm thinking of it with the bad names as a front end and the backbone.
Yeah.
It's just to put it in some ways that makes it possible for me to remember the difference between them. So
yeah, and there's so many things that we haven't talked about now. Even so, for example, we didn't even go into app roles or expose an API or all of those different things, which are sort of a whole own can of worms. And
I think we need an episode, a part 2 for this.
Oh yeah, most definitely.
Yeah.
But Olav, if you really needed it every day, then you would know. The reason why you keep forgetting it is because you don't use it. So.
So and every time I really, really, really need it, I don't remember it. So but that was
now
a great.
You have a video.
Now we have a video, so I can see every now and then when I need it.
I'm going to look at this after and see if I learned something.
Yeah. And you, Alex, did you learn something?
I'm going to hit repeat until it sits.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
We're going. So I think the things that we need to cover in the next episode is perhaps not app roles and expose an API. That might be the next episode after that, actually, because you have often the need to access Azure resources or other Azure services, and you have something called managed service identities that we simply mentioned, and there are so many things revolving that, which is also enterprise apps, or they become enterprise apps and things like that. So I think we'll dive into that in the next episode, and then we might do some of these API things.
And also, I think it makes a lot of sense to show a practical example of how this can be used, or what kind of things we could use it for.
So, for example, this Jot.ms demo app can just be used for all kinds of testing here. So that's easy. We can do that.
Perfect. So we can forget Lord of the Rings and other trilogies. It's our trilogy. Yes. They are going to want to
Olav,
see.
Don't hurt yourself. Don't hurt yourself.
I think I broke my tongue.
That's good.
We're going to make a quadruplegy.
Yeah.
Octology. That's better.
Octology. Yeah.
I don't know if that's even a word, but let's see. We'll
so
probably
no, when you
hear
set
it
up the redirect URI, we will not get the
No,
error message
we're not going to continue this because this is way too long already.
So,
yeah. So no, we're going to continue it, but we're not right now, and we will essentially use this as our demo page rather than building a whole application and everything. So
this could be
show
interesting
you
to
very
see
soon.
if. Please comment to the video if you have a practical example you would like to see demoed.
Also, if you're still watching after all this, then thank you, I guess.
Yeah. A special thank you to Marius that took the time with just doing this on the spot, because it was not rehearsed. So this is just show how amazing Marius is.
I'm sure no one could be able to tell that this was not.
No.
You know what's a funny thing about a TV show called Top Gear is that they once got an award for the best unscripted television show. Which is kind of funny because it's very scripted. Everything they do is scripted.
I would say so.
I really like that you compared us to Top Gear.
Yeah.
Where
sort of the same thing.
And we are going for that prize. We are going for that prize, the best unscripted show. Yeah.
And we all know who is Captain Slow here.
Okay, who is Captain Slow here?
Okay, so that's it for this episode.
Okay,
and let's take lunch.
Round it up. Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bye.
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 Bye.